And in other development, there has been a lot of talk around responsible taxation and corporate citizens contributing their fair share to society through the taxes they pay to government. Now, taxpayers need to be able to understand their rights and duties and balance their legitimate desire to manage their affairs efficiently with respecting the law and the communities in which they operate. Also, environmental, social, and governance-centric investors focused on incorporating their values and concerns into their selection processes also expect companies to conduct their tax affairs in a manner that is responsible and transparent. It is therefore imperative that companies not only contribute their part, but take proactive steps to tell their story in terms of their tax contribution and its impact on the society in which they operate. There is also the need to establish the role tax administrators have to play in the implementation and sustainability of a responsible tax and transparent reporting system. This has also become imperative as the federal government plans to broaden its tax base. Joining us now to look at this is Martins Arogi, Partner, Tax Regulatory and People Services, KPMG, Nigeria. Good morning, Martins. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me too.
All right, let's start by understanding what responsible taxation is and why it should be on the table for organizations in Nigeria this time.
Thank you very much. When I listened to your introduction, I was a bit weary because I didn't know what else I was going to add because you had covered the topic very, very, very extensively. What is responsible taxation at the end of the day is primarily ensuring that the companies that operate in a particular environment take steps to pay the right taxes and also then properly report what they've paid. And a number of people typically focus on how much is paid. But there is a process that undertakes, starting from your governance rules and processes. How do you determine how much taxes you pay? How do you review the tax impact of the various transactions that you engage in? And then it then extends to what are the decisions you take on a day-to-day basis that impacts the taxes that you pay to the government. And then finally, how do you then report this? There's consistently been a lot of talk around how the Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio is extremely low compared to other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the question has always been, do multinationals don't pay their fair share, or are we focused on a very restricted number of companies to the detriment of the large number of other entities in our environment? And companies need to then take the initiative and begin to tell their story and say this is how we engage the communities in which we operate through the amount of taxes that we pay, which then contributes to government resources and then development of those communities. So responsible taxation starts from taking the right decisions and then properly reporting how you contribute through taxes to the communities in which you operate in.
Now, is there a general framework for responsible taxation in Nigeria?
Unfortunately, we don't have one today because it has to be driven by legislation, but it doesn't exist. But even in the absence of legislation, we are saying that companies are responsible corporate citizens. So they don't need to be told what to do. They don't need to be forced to do these things. It's in their best interest to let the people that they provide services to, that they sell goods to, understand how much they spend on those companies' goods and services translates to the infrastructure that they see in their communities on a day-to-day basis. So it's for those companies to be able to tell that story and be able to drive that message. So that people see that when I buy your goods, when I take advantage of your service, it's not just money that ends up in the pocket of shareholders. It also translates to impact in our individual communities through the amount of taxes that these companies then subsequently pay back to government. So yes, there is no framework, but we think that it's in the best interest of everybody, whether it is forced or not, to be able to tell this story.
Okay, so how does this key into the larger environmental, social, and governance, conversation, which is vital right now?
Okay, when you look at ESG as a spectrum, it covers both environmental, society, and governance. A lot of time, the focus is primarily around the environmental parts, which is climate change. You have countries that have tax laws that speak to or try to encourage the right behavior from a climate change perspective, carbon taxes, carbon credits. We don't have that in Nigeria. But there's also the impact on society because companies have a responsibility to the society and to the communities in which they operate. So that's one part that is covered under the concept of responsible taxation. And there is also the governance aspect. It is the responsibility of companies to ensure that they have a right framework and structure that guarantees that whatever is due to government is paid at the right and appropriate time. So government is not shortchanged. Because again, what's the primary source of government revenue? What's the primary source for the roads we see, the lights we have on, pipe-borne water in our communities? It's government taxes. So how have you put in place a structure in terms of governance that helps you ensure that you're able to do the right thing from a tax perspective that then has an overall impact on the communities in which you operate? So it ties into the ESG conversation, both from a society and from a governance perspective. And when you extend it to carbon taxes and carbon credits that we don't currently have in Nigeria, it covers the whole spectrum.
Now, is this being explored in other African countries, or Nigeria once again is leading the way in forward thinking?
There are a few countries right now in Africa, South Africa, for example, where the concept of responsible taxation and responsible tax reporting is already beginning to take hold. There are a whole lot more countries in the Western world where it is now compulsory in terms of disclosure requirements that you have to make. If you take the average financial statements in Nigeria today, and you can have access to at least all of that for those companies that are listed. What you will find is that the tax number or the tax paid is a simple one line, which covers only one type of tax, companies' income tax. It doesn't cover value-added tax, the PAYE that companies pay as a result of employees that they engage, that then impacts the community. It doesn't cover the various levies, social welfare schemes, and all of that. Several payments that companies make. You don't see them as separate lines in the financial statements. So users of this information don't have access to that level of detail. And it's very, very important that they have access to that level of detail. So yes, Nigeria is supposed to set the tone for Africa by showing the way that this can be done and how this can drive responsible behaviors in a whole number of companies, and also then currently have a significant impact on communities.
Now, some organizations may see this as unnecessary exposure. What do you foresee are the benefits for organizations in Nigeria?
It's a bit surprising when I hear you talk around, oh, I don't want to put out all my information out there because it may be unnecessary exposure. But the truth is, currently today in the tax space, there is an element of distrust that exists between taxpayers and tax administrators. Being more transparent, I don't think would increase the level of distrust. I think what it would do is help bridge that gap. Like I always say, whenever we talk about 6% being the ratio of tax contribution to GDP today, it's very likely that the focus has been on a small group. But we then make it compulsory for everybody to put out their tax information, you'll be very surprised and see that the guys who think that they are not, or who people think are not doing their fair share, are doing way more than their fair share. And what would that do? It would help you bridge that gap. It would help you build trust between taxpayers and tax administrators, because taxpayers have become a bit more transparent in the level of detail about their tax affairs that they are then providing to tax administrators. So I don't think that it would be unnecessary exposure. Rather, I think it will be something that would help build and engender trust between administrators, taxpayers, and the stakeholders in the communities in which they operate.
Now, what is the role of the government and, of course, tax administrators in nurturing, the growth of tax transparency?
Most importantly, legislation. Putting in place proper legislation that then makes it, in a sense, mandatory for companies to provide certain level of disclosures in their annual financial statements. Now, if you go to somewhere like the UK, they have what's called the Senior Accounting Officer Rule that was introduced over 10 years ago. So we will be coming very late into the market in respect of this. And what it says is that there should be a level of tax disclosures that has to be signed up by the most senior accounting officer in every company that details both your tax governance rules and then the amount you pay, not only the one liner you would see in the average financial statement, but across the various bouquet of taxes, analyzing how it compares to your profitability, how it compares to your spend on various other items that you do on a day-to-day basis of the company. How does it compare with your overall industry average? How does it compare with other industries? So one thing that government can do is put in place that kind of legislation in Nigeria, and that's the most important thing. And once we have that legislation, we have that level of detail. It also helps government in a sense because we've always complained about the same set of companies being audited over and over and over again without us having the resources to cover the entire field. Now, if you have that level of disclosure, that level of information, we can then commit the limited resources we have to do audits on those which we have concerns around the level of information that they provided. While those for whom we have adequate information and we are satisfied with how that information compares with industry average and with other aspects of the company's financial profile, we let them go. So it's more around a risk-based approach to conducting audits that saves government resources. So it's something that works for both, not only government, taxpayers, and again, like I said, the end of all of this is me and you, and us having access to information that helps us understand how the activities of these companies translate to impact for me and you.
Yeah. Now, I understand that KPMG is having some kind of enlightening webinar on this. When is that, and what can we expect to gain from this session?
Okay, the webinar is next week, Thursday. It's on the 25th of November at 10 a.m. And we will be having representative of the tax administrators there. We'll also be having a very renowned ESG advocates from civil society and from the academia, just to share their own perspective as to how all of these types of companies taking the initiative, government supporting them, and how all of this adds up to impact in society.
Okay. Well, before I let you go there, of course, last week the federal government had announced a new development plan, a national development plan, where it indicated its intention to broaden the tax base. From KPMG, what's the take of your organization in this whole thing of broadening the tax base?
Okay. Now, this ties exactly, responsible taxation would even help in broadening the tax base because it helps immediately identify those who are not paying their fair share. Transparency reporting helps identify those who are not paying their fair share. You can't broaden the tax base without having information. And this is a veritable source of information that helps you broaden the tax base. It's a conversation we've been having for years, how we place significant burden on a very small percentage of corporate citizens, and how it's very necessary to broaden the tax base if government needs to increase its take from tax in the country. So yeah, this ties into that conversation, making sure that companies report what they do, and then gives us a foundation to determine those that we need to then go after and help broaden the tax base.
All right. Thank you very much, Martins Arogie, for sharing your thoughts with us today on responsible taxation. I think I learned something there. I wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome. FX Commodities Market Update is next after the break. Do stay with us.